Hi, guess what? As a result of the, no, I'm not even going to say it. I've heard quite enough of it. You've probably heard enough of it. I'm here. The good news is, yes, I'm going to talk about monster knowledge checks. The bad news is I have 4 pages, so it's not a short video. I thought this would be a simple topic, but it is not a simple topic. And once I'd actually written everything out that I thought people would ask me, I realized we're looking at a giant, huge video. So make sure you have some food and some drink and you are settled down, because you're going to have to settle in for the long haul. So, I do apologise for those people who really like everything broken down into just 3 minutes and nothing more, and should I, how am I supposed to sort of make it happen in just 3? It's not going to happen. Not that most of my videos are 3 minutes nowadays anyway. Okay. Now, if you're watching the video, you'll find that this is a live stream. It's unlisted, so unless you have clicked your subscription button, the notification button, and turned on notifications, you probably won't be able to get notified of this video or access it later on if you need to leave, and I totally understand if you need to do so. So make sure you do that. Click on subscribe, the notifications button, and make sure the bell is turned on. Okay, if all that is in place, you should be fine. You should better come back and access the video. The good news is I do an edited version of all of my videos. All my live streams get edited down, so I cut out the Q&A at the beginning and the end and all the sort of waffle that I'm doing right now. So you can sort of get past all of that. I will put the start time for this video down in the description once YouTube publishes it, which they'll do at their pace, and I'll get to it as soon as I can. Okay. If you are a patron, you can get access to these without any trouble whatsoever. You just go to the Patreon page and you can get it because it's all unlocked for you and you don't have to do too much other than that. Okay, now, if you haven't been part of my live streams, normally what I do is I have like screens and screens of notes that I read off, and while I'm doing that, I'm putting up slides and showing you pictures rather than my face. Frankly, I actually don't even watch people's videos nowadays. I just listen to them while I'm doing other things. So, but my face will come back and you'll be able to see me at the end of the presentation. So don't run away. You can ask questions, give feedback. You can tell me what you think. You know, you might want to have to add something else. I'm fine with that. How's it going, Tom Miller? And how's it going, Alec? Okay. Get settled down, because we're going to do this. It's been so long. Should have done it a long time ago, like so many videos, but can only do so much. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, because I always do talk about Dungeons and Dragons as it happens. Today's topic is something you probably won't find on YouTube or the internet, and that is monster knowledge checks for Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, no, actually what I mean is for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. You might find information from 3.5 or version 4 if you ever played that version, but for Dungeons and Dragons 5e, there's really nothing. This is a Dungeon Master Guide for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Not really a player's guide, but you can hang around even if you are a player, because it's not really going to devolve or reveal anything that's super important that would sort of mess up your Dungeon Master's life. So you can stick around, not a problem. Now, information on monsters and beasts and creatures can be determined by a knowledge skill check. We've all known this, we just didn't really know exactly how to go about doing it, because all we were given was, okay, some numbers from 5 through to 30, and told one is, supposed to be very easy and one is supposed to be near impossible. And then, of course, we've got to make up the rest of it from there on, which actually makes an awful lot of sense. But what I want to say is, yes, you can make monster knowledge checks. Your players should be encouraged to do so, but sometimes a knowledge check can't be made by a character because the monster or that creature has never been seen by anybody in the world, or it's just really rare. So there wouldn't be documentation, there wouldn't be rumours, there wouldn't be any information they could actually research or learn or have any awareness of. So don't allow players to make knowledge checks on things they should not be making knowledge checks on. You are the dungeon master, you're allowed to do that. So make sure you use it when you need to. I'm assuming that the character, when they make their knowledge check, saw the creature or the monster. Okay, there are 2 questions that will pop up before we move on. This is quite a long video and I have already warned you it would be. What if the character didn't see the creature, or if the information they're getting on the creature or monster is second-hand information or third-party information, or they just have a rough drawn picture which might be sort of almost like a stick figure, or maybe a little bit better depending on how well the person drew the monster. Can they make a knowledge check from there? Well, I have a whole bunch of suggestions, but there's a second question that will tend to come up, and I know it's always there because people have issues with proficiency with Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and that is, what if the character is not proficient? They're making a knowledge check on a monster, but they're not proficient in the skill we're going to use for making that knowledge check. I'm bundling all of this together. So whether they have no proficiency in the skill they're making the knowledge check on, and if the creature that they are trying to make a knowledge check on, they didn't actually see, or they got second or third, or just a drawing to sort of work from. These are all based on my own personal experience. So when I'm talking to you about your options here, it's my experience, other dungeon masters who I have talked to. I have borrowed and stolen from Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 and from Dungeons & Dragons 4e. And I'm going to present 4 possible options to you. I'm going to give you some recommendations, and then you are going to decide how you approach it from there. So the first one is, do not allow them to make a knowledge check. If they aren't proficient in that particular skill, or they didn't actually see the creature themselves and they've only got a scraggy drawing or some third party or second party information, don't even allow the knowledge check whatsoever. So that's certainly your first option or go-to if you really want to. Number 2, you could double the DC or difficulty class for the knowledge check. Essentially, you're trying to make it more difficult because they didn't actually see the creature and they aren't skilled or trained in that particular knowledge. So that makes perfect sense. I have no problems with using those solutions. I think they are probably the smartest ones to use in that particular case. The last 3 are a bit more problematic, but we'll still talk about them. Number 3 is you can apply disadvantage to the knowledge check they make. I do not recommend this, and why? It's due to the absurd results that some players will get with their character who just seem to be able to roll super lucky on 2 dice, and they get like a 20 and a 20 or an 18 and a 20, and they've got disadvantage, and suddenly, even though they have no previous study or information or even skill in this particular knowledge, they can recall vast amounts of information on the monster. So I think it's absurd, but if you want to, that's the whole point, disadvantage is there for a purpose, right? You could use it if you wanted to. The last option is an option that has got problems. It's probably the one thing that most dungeon masters get upset about the most, and that is just allow a normal dice roll. Don't change the DC, allow them to make the dice roll, don't apply disadvantage. I don't recommend this. Myself, personally, I think it's a stupid idea, but it is recommended by the design team. The Wizards of the Coast design team have said that, just let them make a knowledge check. This is fine if that's what you want to do, but I'm not going to support it, not in my own video. Somebody else can do that in their video. Okay, what about with characters who are untrained or not proficient? What sort of information, when they make the knowledge check, if you allow them to do so, what sort of information would they know? And I would say that somebody who has a character who is untrained or not proficient in that skill would only ever be able to get basic information, very, very basic information, no matter what they roll on their D20. that would be my way of approaching it. I think that stops you players gaming the system by just using the probability of the dice to get the things they want out of the game. I mean, you can concoct some sort of harebrained story why they would have known that sort of information, but often it's just a bit silly, really. There is no action. It's not a bonus action. It's not an action. It's not an interaction. It's not a move. In no way do you need to use any action to make a knowledge check. Okay? You just do it. Either you know it or you don't know it. You can't retry your check. If the players don't get the result they want on the dice, tough titties, and it's time to move on. Now, I know that a lot of people were like, no, really, do we want to do something like that? Do we want to be as hard and fast about that sort of thing? Well, that's up to you, as I've said, but I would say do not allow retries. Dungeon masters wanting to allow a retry on a check, they do so at their own risk. If that's the sort of thing you want to do, that's fine, but you do so at your own risk because players will game the system. They're looking at probabilities. Now, Dungeons and Dragons is not a true game of skill. Chess is a true game of skill, but they're using probabilities. So they're calculating the probability of getting the dice roll they want. So if you keep allowing them to roll dice, they will eventually get the result they want, particularly if the entire table decides they all want to make a roll. Okay? So I would say be very careful. Now, what if you're the sort of person who really wants to allow a retry by the characters? So stick to retries only being available to your character when their proficiency increases, provided they are proficient in that skill. When the character's level goes up, another option. When a special class feature becomes available, when they use downtime to do some research on the monster, that would be a good time to allow them to make a retry if you want to at the end of that. Or some sort of relevant background with some study included. So maybe they have a background like the sage. The sage spends lots of time in the library, so that would make a lot of sense that, okay, I've used downtime, I've also got the background sage, and I spend a lot of time studying that particular creature. It could be the acolyte, anything that's sort of got a background that would fit that particular creature, monster, or a beast of some kind. Although beasts I don't think are frankly the biggest issue for you. So what skills are you going to use for the monster or creature knowledge check? There's really only 3 that I can think of, but I'm going to talk about 4. So the one that you're going to go to probably the most, and that's really a no-brainer, and that is number 1 is your nature. The nature skill, I would only use nature for non-monstrous humanoids and beasts only. That's it. That's all that really covers. It doesn't really cover the other monsters. I know that some people will say, well, I don't know that I necessarily agree, but my video, I'm doing it the way I want to do it. You can change things around if you want to. I had a look at previous versions of the game, and that seemed to be how things were laying out. Although, as I said, the problem is that Dungeons and Dragons 5e only has a few skills, so it's very hard to sort of encapsulate everything within the skills that you've got when there's only 3 to really call on, and previous versions of the game used vastly more than that. So that's sort of one hassle. The most common skill that will be used is Arcana. So that'll cover your aberrations, your constructs, your dragons, your elementals, the Fae, giants, magical beasts, monstrosities, monstrous humanoids. So that's the monstrous humanoids that aren't sort of like elves, dwarves. So we're talking about goblins, gnolls, things like that. Your plant creatures. No, I didn't put plant creatures into nature. I felt that plant creatures were a bit too out there for nature based on the description that is provided in the Player's Handbook for Dungeons & Dragons 5e and all the other resources. Of course, there was nothing there to really use that was going to be helpful. And Arcana also covers the monster oozes, so those sorts of things. What about something like religion? I think religion is a good skill to use for knowledge checks. Religion will cover things like angels, your celestials, fiends, demons, devils, your gods or goddesses, and your undead. All the things that are sort of traditionally associated with religion, your clerics, your paladins, and stuff like that. Now, the last skill that I'm going to talk about isn't really quite what you might expect. I'm going to talk about history. I'm sure a few people were already thinking, Fred, why did you not say anything about history? Well, I am. I'm only going to use or suggest you use history for historically significant events that monster has been involved with. So you can recall historical events that may have occurred with that monster. That's it. It's not a monster biology, ability, ecology, or general knowledge check as such when you're doing it. History is very specific. And I looked at previous versions of Dungeons and Dragons, and that certainly seemed to be the going policy and the approach that designers had been following. And I think we're actually probably smart to stick with doing that with Dungeons and Dragons 5e. All right, we're getting closer. I know you guys want some numbers. There are two systems for making or determining the difficulty class for your monster knowledge checks. The first one I want to talk about, I don't particularly like, but I'm still going to mention it, and that is it's 10 plus the CR or challenge rating of the monster. That's for your basic monster knowledge check. Then you're going to add plus 5 to get more additional information on top of the basic information. This method I don't like, and I don't recommend it. This method is absolutely ludicrous, with high DCs, much higher than 30 in some cases, for just basic information on some monsters that have a really high challenge rating. Now, I would like to point out that this particular system, 10 plus the challenge rating of the monster to set your DC for basic information, is something that Mike Mearls has discussed. He's talked about it on Twitter. He's suggested it forward and said, yes, you could use this. I think it's ludicrous and stupid. I would recommend not using it. I'm not going to put out numbers. I'm not going to write it down because I don't want to encourage you to use it in the slightest. But if you must, you can. The one I'm going to suggest is the one we have been given, and that is DCs or difficulty class rankings going from 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. That's what I recommend. Nothing beyond that, no DCs of 0, none of that nonsense. We're going to keep it nice and simple with what we already have been given by the designers and just stick with that. Okay. Monster knowledge checks. What are the DCs? What sort of information will we get if we get a 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 or 30? We're going to start off with the first one, which frankly is very easy. So very easy is a 5. That's going to give you information on non-monstrous humanoids and beasts only. You're going to get their name, the type of creature it is. So a beast is a beast. That's pretty simple. Some non-monstrous humanoids might have a descriptor that says dwarf or elf or something else. That's all fine. Plus a description. So what they would look like, physically, what they sort of their appearance. That's only for a very easy DC of 5. If we're dealing with a DC of 10, which is just easy rather than very easy, that's going to give us information on non-monstrous humanoids and beasts, and that will give us their abilities and their attack methods. That's it. So non-monstrous humanoids and beasts, abilities and attack methods, nothing else. Now I want to say a little bit more about non-monstrous humanoids and beasts before we move on to the next DC, and that is, frankly, I think that a DC of 5 or 10 should be just ignored. I wouldn't even bother with them. I would just ignore them on the table that I showed you. Frankly, I think that sort of information should not require a dice roll. I think that the commoner would know this sort of information already. You know, okay, we come across a lion, we know what a lion looks like, we know what sort of attacks it makes, we know it's a beast, okay, it can use its teeth, it can use its claws, I suppose it could sit on you if you really want to be fancy, it can pounce on you, it does things like a big cat does, right? We know what a little cat does, we know what a big cat does. A lot of this stuff is so general in terms of the information that you should not be forcing your players to make a dice roll. I would stick to making your dice rolls for 15, 20, 25, 30, and that's it. But I know there'll be a few people who want to do that sort of thing. They want a DC for these sorts of things. Now, what about information beyond 10 for non-monstrous humanoids and beasts? Most beasts are pretty simple and don't really have things like resistances, vulnerabilities, or immunities. There isn't usually an awful lot of information you need to worry about with regard to passing it on to your player's character, so I would suggest don't worry about it. But if you must, you can use the ranking system I'm about to talk to you about from 15 to 30. You can use that ranking system and just scale it up if you need to. Alright, so DC 15, where we're really doing our hard work with our monster knowledge checks. This is the medium difficulty. This is going to give you the monster's name, what sort of monster it is, so that's type of monster, and a description of what it looks like. That's just a medium check. Now something like a 20, which is our hard DC, that's going to give our monster traits, the monster's methods of attacks, all of them, not just their basic standard ones, and any sort of special abilities they might have. So that's a hard DC of 20. Something like a DC of 25, which is very hard, will give you monster resistances, what sort of things they are resistant to, their senses, so how they see the world, whether they use smell or scent, or whether they have blind sight, that sort of stuff, and then any vulnerabilities. If they are vulnerable to something, I think that is probably best put into a very hard DC of 25. I am basing a lot of this from versions 3.5 and 4e, for those of you who are wondering how I'm coming up with all of this. The DC 30, which is near impossible, that'll give you monster immunities, biology, ecology, that sort of stuff. Really the tail end of things that most people wouldn't necessarily know unless they've done significant study and know what the heck they're doing. I would also lump into the DC 30 any kind of law, maybe, at the Dungeon Master's discretion. And frankly, all of this should be at the Dungeon Master's discretion. I know there's going to be a few people who will say, but Fred, what about a DC of 31 or up? So DC's greater than 30. The problem with a DC of more than 30 is we're now falling into the realm of impossible information to know. So if it's impossible to know, why are we trying to set a DC higher than 30? So I frankly don't like this idea, but I will talk about it very quickly. If you're going to use it, special study required. Special study required. There needs to be proficiency. You need to have some sort of special training. You need to be spending lots of time in your downtime studying these things. I'm not entirely sure what sort of information a player's character would know if it's impossible to know, but maybe the kind of information you can determine from the monster is something like maybe it's got brain cancer, or it's a aberration of its species, it's a genetic modification that's not completely obvious when you just look at it straight away, and would probably require some sort of dissection to actually find out. So you would actually have to spend some time with the creature while it's either dead or incapacitated to figure out what's going on. As I said, I don't recommend a DC of greater than 30 because, frankly, again, it's ludicrous. Okay, alright, we covered pretty much everything, but there's one other thing I want to say, because I know somebody's going to ask that question. please try not to focus on the statistical numbers and details from the monster stat block. Okay? I know that there is a temptation to think, okay, they should be able to find out everything on the monster stat block. If they get a 30, which is near impossible, or they get greater than 30, then they should be able to know what the armor class and hit points and what the saving throws for the creature is, and any other sort of, exactly how much its damage output is and what its attack modifier is. Rubbish. Don't even fall into that trap. I've done that more than a few times. I can tell you, it's like ashes in your mouth, and I wouldn't do it if I were you. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to encourage metagaming by your players, which is actually often what they want. They want to know the actual numbers on the monster stat block that is sitting in front of you. It is also a product of so many people being used to getting this sort of information when playing some types of video games. Remember, Dungeons & Dragons is not a video game. Not if you're playing at the table and you're not playing the actual video game itself. So, yes, we're playing the RPG, tabletop Dungeons & Dragons, not the video game Dungeons & Dragons. This is a rough Dungeon Master guide, okay? Now, I've been quite forceful in my opinion on a lot of this, simply because I spent 6 years having to deal with monster knowledge checks, and I'm sure some of you have had the same experience if you've been playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e for a long time. It is just my opinion. You do not need to use it. You can take it or leave it. You can modify it, and I suggest that you do so, because I certainly think when it comes to monster knowledge checks, all of this should be at the Dungeon Master's discretion. There will be situations where you will come across a monstrous humanoid or a non-monstrous humanoid or a monster that you have modified as the Dungeon Master, where the players could never know that sort of information. It would be impossible. And no amount of dice rolling should change that. So it's your discretion, you work with it, make it make sense so it works for you and you don't have a whole lot of headaches, because I do not want a truckload of questions in the comments asking me how to solve problems. Okay, now if this video was useful to you, and I really hope that it has, because I know there's so little information on monster knowledge checks, great news, fantastic. Guess what? I have hundreds of videos for players and Dungeon Masters that talk about Dungeons & Dragons and Dungeons & Dragons 5e. You're welcome to go and check those out. I have them all sorted out in playlists, easy to find. If you want to support my channel so I keep doing videos of this type, then guess what? I have a Patreon page. So you can become a patron and get access to the unlisted live streams and my notes if you want that sort of thing, plus a few other things that I drop in there once in a while. If you're not wanting to do that sort of thing, I also have affiliate links to the book depository, and that's to Amazon as well. They are affiliate links. I get a small commission. You pay exactly the same price. That's for Amazon and the book depository. I also have a merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos if you are interested in buying some merchandise. Otherwise, don't worry about that sort of stuff and just keep watching my videos. If you keep watching my videos and you're watching ads, I get paid, and that's fine with me too. Okay, make sure to share, like, and subscribe. You know the normal stuff. Hit the bell button. Make sure that you've got your notifications turned on. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, I'm not gone, but I am just getting my eyes on. I'm going to try my glasses and see if my glasses work any better today. And we'll just switch over to my face so we can have a face-to-face talk, or at least a face one side. I've got the face, and you guys, I can't see you guys. I've got the hard job. I just got to do all the reading, right? Are my eyes working at all today? Holy Toledo. Well, my glasses aren't, but my eyes are all right. Well, I wouldn't say all right, but good enough. Okay, let's talk about monster knowledge checks, because I know for a fact there are lots of people who probably have lots of experience in dealing with monster knowledge checks and would like to share that information, and this is the place to do it. And you lucky people are the people in the live stream who will actually get access to that information. So let's have a talk about that. If you want to talk about something other than the monster knowledge check for Dungeons and Dragons 5e, that's fine too. I'm happy to talk about that sort of stuff. Doesn't matter if you're a dungeon master or a player. Let's have a chat. Okay, so I've already said hi to Tom Miller. The world is closed, but Fred is still here for us. That's right. Look, you can be guaranteed that the channels that you have subscribed to on YouTube are going to probably do a lot more live stream content because they have to. Because a lot of the other access points they had for making money have closed. Although most people on YouTube are probably all operating over the internet anyway, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But I've already noticed there's been a lot of live streaming going on recently, and I would expect that to continue. Hi, Alec. Now, I can't remember who suggested this topic, but I think it was a fantastic idea, by the way. The Carter videos. How's it going, Carter videos? Hi, John. How's it going, mate? You like the topic? I thought people would like the topic. It's certainly a topic that needs to be talked about a lot more. It's a shame. Let's hope that some of the channels see what I've done and they come back and try and do something better. Because the trick of it, right, is somebody does a video on a topic, somebody else on YouTube sees it, thinks that's a good idea, and does a better job of it the next time round, which would be great. Now, I might butcher this name, so let me just go slow. Hessenberg. I think I got your name correct, but you'll tell me if I butchered it. It's entirely possible. Hi, how's it going? Scott. Hi, Scott. I let the group decide how they want to play knowledge checks. However, they decide also applies to monster knowledge checks versus the player's characters. Now that's a smart way to go, Scott. So that means that monsters can also make a knowledge check on the player's characters. That's actually very, very interesting. I hadn't actually talked about that. This is why the benefit of being in a live stream, right? Because there's always somebody comes up with a few ideas that I didn't actually put forward. And Scott's idea is pretty good. I really like the idea of having a monster knowledge check for the monster against the player's characters, or contending the player's characters. So the only problem with doing something like that I can see is that you're really only going to be able to pull out information that's fairly universal for that particular humanoid, rather than very specific information, I guess. Unless, of course, they are historically significant in some way. I guess, if they've been involved in a few major events within the history of the world, then maybe history checks would make a lot of sense in that case. Okay, but I like the idea. Ben's World. Okay, I have entered Ben's World. Hi, mate. From Canada. F. Hubber, that's Fred Hubber. I know my name is Fred, but he's also Fred. And he's made it. It looks like he's made it on time too. Kanoko, hi, how's it going, Kanoko? Great, make it in time for sign off of the... Oh, whoops. Said it too soon. You missed it again. That's a shame, Fred. I don't know what to say. I've told you before, I have no control over it. All I can tell people is subscribe, hit the bell button, and turn on notifications. It's the best I can do. The rest is up to YouTube. Okay? Cameron. Hi, how's it going, Cameron? What else have we got here? Fred Hubber. If they use the cell phone to look up the creature, they also fail the check. Fair enough. Okay, so there's a good point. I think that's pretty fair. I think if Fred makes a good point, if the players use the monster manual, whether it's on their phone or in book form to look up the details of the monster, then as a dungeon master, I would change stuff. I would just change it. I would say, please do not do that. You shouldn't be doing that. That'll work for people who don't have a really good memory. But I know for a fact that I can, and I have a terrible memory. My memory is not that good. But I've been playing the game long enough as a dungeon master. If I'm playing the game, I remember that a zombie has an armor class of 8. And I roughly know exactly how many hit points the goblin's going to have. You know, goblin's got like 7 hit points, and a kobold's got 5. So I know those sorts of things. So unless the dungeon master changes those things, which I highly recommend you do, then it's too easy for me to pick out the numbers that I want from that. Now, if you think about a player, and I'm sure a few of you have players at your table who have incredible memories, they can read text and memorize and remember everything. And I think it's selective. I think it's down to their interest in the topic rather than a photographic memory as such. But they can remember huge amounts of information and so forth, which means they can just memorize everything from the monster manual on all the monster stat blocks. So there's another thing to remember in terms of what's likely to happen, not just people looking things up on their phone or pulling the book out, which is bad form. Personally, I think that's really bad form. The only time you should be doing something like that is if you have a creature or a beast that you have to control and you need to know the numbers to be able to do that. And that's the only time as a dungeon master I want my players to do that sort of thing. Okay, Thomas. Hi, Thomas. What do we got here? Could you give us an example of a monster knowledge check used in an adventure? Oh, gosh. Okay, Thomas. Okay, that seems reasonable. Let's go to the Lost Mine of Phandelver, shall we? I did have the monster manual with me, but what we'll do is we'll use the Lost Mine of Phandelver. I will turn to a page and pick a monster, and then I'll turn to the stat block and we'll go from there. So what was the first page? I'm not even going to turn a page. I'm just going to look at something that's in bold. There we go, Orc. So Orc on page 35 of the Lost Mine of Phandelver with regard to Wyvern. Somebody wants to make a knowledge check on orcs. So I turn to the orc section. Pardon me while I turn to the orc section. That takes time. Okay. Using the method that I've just talked about, the orc is a monstrous humanoid. Okay, it's not a non-monstrous humanoid. So I would not use a DC of 5 or 10. And as I said before, I believe that a 5 or 10 DC for a monster knowledge check is a load of junk and a waste of your time as a dungeon master. Stick to 15 through to 30. So 15 means I know what the monster name is, so I would know that it's an orc when I see the monster. I would know its type. I know it's a humanoid orc because that's the type of humanoid it is. It's in the top of the descriptor on the stat block. And I would also be able to give them a description. So I would describe them as having sort of large teeth, being green, maybe protruding tusks, scraggly hair, black hair, covered in scars, using rudimentary weapons, say an axe. And orcs tend to prefer using a great axe, so I would say it would be a rudimentary great axe with some hide clothing or armor if it's wearing armor, and usually on the stat block it says hide armor, so I would describe all of that. So that's a DC 15. Okay, that's for the orc. That's all we get, nothing else. So DC 20 is where we actually start pulling out a bit more information. DC 20 is hard, so on the orc we should know what the monster trait is. What are the monster traits for the orc? We know that these things are incredibly aggressive and that they can move incredibly quickly towards their enemy, or anybody that they think is hostile. What you do not say is, as a bonus action, the orc can move up to its speed toward a hostile creature that it can see. Don't read out the trait, just break it down and paraphrase it and use like normal human language to describe what's going on. What can this orc do in terms of the type of attacks that it has? Well, you would say it has a great axe, so it could swing and hit you with a great axe. It's carrying javelins on its back, so it could throw a javelin at you. That's really all the orc can do. It's a barbaric looking creature, okay? What sort of special abilities does it have? Well, it doesn't really have any special abilities. The orc is pretty simple. We gave out its trait, which is it's aggressive and moves very fast towards its enemy. That's it. Okay, so that was nice and simple. Right, so we're moving on and we're going to start looking at a DC 25 for the orc, which is very hard. So what are the monster resistances for the orc? Well, we look at our stat block and there are none. So we would say, no, it's not resistant to anything. This creature doesn't have any kind of resistances that you know of. But what I can tell you is something about its senses. It has dark vision. I wouldn't say it has dark vision to 60 feet. I would just say it has dark vision as such, okay? Does this creature have vulnerabilities? No, it doesn't. You could certainly include in a DC 20 the types of languages that it can speak. So you could say something like, it speaks Common and Orc. But hopefully they will get the gist of that anyway when they start communicating with the orcs, unless they go straight to, let's kill it. Okay, so a DC 30, which is near impossible. What are we going to talk about with regard to the orc? Well, it's not immune to anything. The stat block indicates no immunities, so no immunities. It's biology. Now, the problem with doing biology on the orc and ecology and lore is you're really going to need something like the monster manual. So I would then switch over and say, look, orcs are renowned for being barbaric and savage, posturing. They have a low forehead. They have pig-like features and so forth. Canines that resemble the boar, like boar tusks. And then I would turn to my monster manual, and we go to the orc in the monster manual, which is on page. You can tell I wasn't prepared for this, playing it by ear, but somebody's called me on it, and I didn't think I was necessarily needing to do something like this, but we'll play along with this. Okay, so we've got a section on orcs, and that is page 242 through to 245. So 242 to 245 talks about the orc. So we could talk about the fact that their tribes are like a plague, and they gather in tribes, exert dominance over others, they have a bloodlust. So all the information on those pages. You could talk about the fact that they are ranging scavengers, and they slaughter and raid anywhere that they sort of set themselves up. They might move around a lot. We can talk about orc crossbreeding if we wanted to. It's really, these are dungeon master discretion stuff. You do not have to give them everything. You can talk about their god, Gomesh, the one-eyed. You could talk about their leadership and how they revere strength and power. But that would be for a very high DC. So like a 30, where they would know like vast amounts of information. Now you could say, yes, but some of the lower DCs of, say, 20 or 25 could also reveal some orc lore, some very basic orc lore, like the fact that they range around and the scavengers and the raiders. That's up to you as a dungeon master. You can adjust those and change those. But I'm not going to do that because my guide is very generic. You've got to understand that it's not the same. Knowledge on an orc would not be the same as something as a beholder, where it would be very unusual for people to have a lot of information on a beholder unless they get a really good roll, or a dragon, or a specific type of dragon. Does that really answer your question? Thomas, did I give you exactly what you wanted, or did I need to provide you? Now you'll let me know, Thomas. Do I need to give you a different example of a different creature or monster, or was the orc enough for you in this case? Okay, I'm closing the book. I'm putting it over here, and I'm putting that out of the way. Have a drink of water before I lose my voice. Okay, All right, let's get back through here. William, hi William. Maybe monsters roll checks to guess character class or background. I suppose that's possible, but can a monster look at a character and guess what their background is? I mean, it's going to come down to how they're dressed, isn't it? Because nothing else would be giving that away. So if they're dressed in a particular way that doesn't really reveal their background, then that's a bit hard to determine for a monster. Their character class, maybe. That might be something that the monsters could determine, William, so that makes a good point. You know, somebody like who's a wizard, not probably walking around in armour, probably carrying a book or a spell focus, provided that the monster's sort of familiar with spellcasters. So those sorts of things might make a lot of sense. They could certainly make knowledge checks on, your monsters could make knowledge checks on your players' characters if they are a dwarf or an elf, and you could give them some lore information regarding the kinds of racial traits and abilities they have. Even something like the Dragonborn or Tiefling, something like that, gnomes, things of that nature. So I think we've covered most of that. Now, what has Fred got to say to Thomas? DM, you need something that has, what? You see something that has greenish skin and a mix of bits of armor. Yes, that's right. Player knowledge. Check for your cleric knowledge. I like the idea. Yeah, look, when it comes to history, really, I wouldn't bother too much with history unless the player has a character who is proficient in history. I'm sure there are some basic historical events that would come up in normal conversation and rumour in a tavern that are common knowledge. So excluding history checks might not necessarily be the go-to. But as I said, I think when they're untrained and not proficient, that it's better to go with they can only ever know very basic information. Radical Barry, thank you. I have quite a few hats, but this is the one I wear the most. What do you got here, Scott? I had humanoids rolling religion checks to target the cleric's holy insignias. Nice, I like that. F. Hubber, you see an orc. Don't say this. You see a greenish-skinned humanoid that is a little taller or heavier built than an average human. So what Fred is talking about is, you know, you don't always have to say what the monster name is. So, for example, if they do really badly or they don't know very much about the monster, then you could certainly say, yes, you see a greenish-skinned humanoid, a little taller than your average build human. That's fine. But there are certain traits and features that distinguish an orc from a human or an elf or a dwarf. So I don't think that never saying that you see an orc is the way to go. I think there are times when you can just say, you see an orc. One, because you've seen orcs before, or two, you've seen them in a book, or you're familiar with their features, and what you see looks like an orc. So it is all right to say, you see an orc. But as I said, I'm leaving that for a DC 15. So the monster name, type, and description, as I said before. Otherwise, you're going to be just giving them the basics of what they see and nothing else. They won't know anything additional on top of that. Okay? What do you got here? Hubber. Note, you may have to adjust the DCs. The party is going to try to have the person with the highest bonus do the check. A DC 45 can be passed without a magic item in some cases. Okay, so here's the thing. And this is why I want you to avoid using really high DCs greater than 30. It's stupid. It's what we did in 3.5. It's what we did in 4E. Don't do it in Dungeons & Dragons 5E. That's my recommendation to you. I would leave that alone, okay? Honestly, I think it's wasting your time. And Thomas, thank you very much. Okay, so I got it. I covered it, gave you the description of how it would work. I didn't really feel like I needed to give an example, but I'm glad I have, certainly if it's helped you. I think generally the DCs and just giving you an idea of what to talk about is good enough. When you talk about resistances and so forth, I don't think you need to get too worried about your language around that, because there's really no numbers attached to it. There's no numbers attached to things like immunities. There's no numbers really attached to vulnerabilities. You're either vulnerable, resistant, or immune to it, or you're not, So stick with those sorts of things. Don't beat yourself up if you feel like you gave too much information. You'll get better at it anyway. Drink of water before I disappear. Last few comments. Alec, what do you got here? I would always say they recognise orcs. They are common, regular enemies of the people. And a half-orcs are common in the world as well. Yeah, well, also too, a half-orc and an orc may be mistaken for each other, depending on their features. I would allow that confusion to take place. But Alec does make a really good point. That there would probably be certain things that, okay, we know it's an orc because they're so common. That's up to you as a dungeon master. I think what Fred Hubber was trying to say is, when you really don't get a very good check, when you really don't get a result that's going to give you any information, then saying that you see greenish-skinned humanoids is like the most sensible thing to say. Just giving them a description of what they see and nothing else. Because that's all their character would really know. Okay? Even if the player knows more than that. Alec, so no roll for just no an orc, but roll for orc lore. Yeah, I think you got to remember that orcs still have a few things attached to them that not everybody would necessarily know about. Would everybody know that orcs have dark vision, or that orcs can move extremely quickly towards their enemy? In other words, that they are fast movers. Would they be familiar with the fact that this creature tends to carry a great axe and favour a great axe? Would they be familiar that they have a javelin, unless it's actually on their body? Do you know what I mean? But look, take it, use it, adjust it as you see fit. Okay, what do you got here, Fred Hubber? Last comment before I disappear. So if you want to put anything in, you better be quick. Depends on the PC level, and the orcs is common in the DM's world. Well, also too, if your PCs have already come across orcs in the past, you could adjust your DCs based on that. So that does make a lot of sense. But it wouldn't necessarily follow that a level 5 character would know a lot about the orc unless they actually encountered orcs. The only information they might know about orcs is what they read from a book, if they ever read a book about orcs, or what they heard from the rumour mill. So even character level is not a great determiner for adjusting the DC for your monster knowledge checks. I didn't really go into that in detail because it's just too much information. And this video is going to wind up being, when it's edited down, it could well be 25 minutes, if not longer. And I felt like I gave you enough information to make it work for you, that you'll feel a lot more confident about how to deal with monster knowledge checks in the future. Okay, I've run out of water. There's nothing left in the chat, which means that I am ready to disappear, like I often do. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, the very, very wee early morning, look after yourself, your family, and your friends, and your neighbours. Yes, and your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.